Hello, YouTube. Thought I'd come on and talk a little bit today. There's a subject I want to talk about. I think recovery today. In writing, it's always said to uh, write what you know. I think it applies to speaking to what you know. You know. So I'll give you a couple of facts off the top. And I know I've come on here about some of my writing, my books. I wrote a book called Myth Monster, which in detail kind of just describes my journey to recovery. So I'll just say this. Uh, Okay, so my name is Timothy Blaine. I'm 58 years old. I've been clean from drugs, all drugs, but primarily crystal meth for 14 years, over 14 years. I think October, I think, is my recovery date. I'm not in 12-step program. I know most people who are in recovery are majority of people who consider themselves to be in recovery attended some kind of 12-step program. So I'm not here to bash 12-step. I think it's one of the as far as getting off of drugs, it's one of the strongest things we have. Uh, I admire that program, but it didn't really work for me. I'll say that. Okay, so a little bit more background. So I started using drugs. I was 28 years. Well, I was started using alcohol and weed and pills and things like that when I was about 21, and I stopped at about 25. I struggled with trying to get clean from 25 to 28, and then at 28, I discovered crystal meth, and I became a serious drug addict. Uh, I mean, made my life, I made my living, I supported my high by committing crimes, mostly boosting. I was what you call a booster or a shoplifter. So I went to jail 30 something times before eventually I was put on probation. And that leads to, if you're in life, that leads to prison. So I went to prison and got sent to San Quentin up here in San Francisco, near San Francisco. And I've pretty much been here ever since. It was 25 years ago. Okay, so after I get to San Francisco, I started selling drugs. I just kind of I had been in it for a while as a user. Being in San Francisco, what happened was that I got released from San Quentin. They give you $200 to at the gate when you leave, so you're not hit the streets desperate and go out and mug somebody or something. But anyway, I was released with $100 because I was from LA, and so it was only enough money to get back to Los Angeles basically. So I chose to stay here, even though I had been locked up for close to 2 years. I was jonesing really hard. I mean, I obsessed about getting high still. I didn't leave the streets. I was taken away from them. So anyway, I got here and started selling drugs. So for over the next 10 years, I was in and out of prison 10 times. So basically, I went every year. I'd be out for a few months. But I did pretty well. I mean, in street language, I did pretty, as far as the streets go, I did pretty well selling drugs. And as much as I wasn't missing any meals, put it like that. But I went back 10 times. Uh, on the ninth time, uh, uh, several things happened. So I can give you my whole story. My book is called Meth Monster, the first book I wrote. It's available on Amazon, so you can get the book if you want to. Uh, Sometimes I put it out for free, but I think it's $2.99 or something like that. So it's a good, worthwhile read if you're trying to get off drugs, I think. And I say that because I opened by saying that I'm not a part of 12-step program. In my 20s, when I first tried to get clean at 25, I went to AA, and they were a big help to me. AA and NA. It was a big help for me. I went to meetings every day. I kind of got some instant friends and people who were going through the same thing, but it kept relapsing. I was I was a young guy, and I guess I just wasn't finished yet. But I found out about the drug that I ended up hooked on there in 12-step. So maybe I had a resentment about that, or that stayed with me. That all the constant talk about drugs and alcohol and so forth was not doing me a good service because it just told me about things that I hadn't tried yet, and I became obsessed while I was still clean. So I'll say it all, and there is going to be a point to this particular video. I know sometimes I just wander around and start just spitting out nonsense, but there's the point I want to make, because I think a lot of times when you're using, and a lot of people they use it. Crystal meth is epidemic in California. Has been for a very, very long time. Since I think as far as back as the '60s, it's moved between demographics, but gay people have been struggling with crystal meth. It's been a big part of the community for a very long time, long before I started using. That's for sure. So back then, 12 step worked fine for me. I had no spiritual life. It was kind of a path for me to start believing in something. And basically, at the time, I was believing in the program, or I was believing that people were all around me who were managing to not use. And since using was everything to me, that seemed like a miracle to me. But after going in and out a few times, I ended up just using drugs again, and ended up taking crystal meth, basically so I wouldn't get so drunk. But uh, try to stay on track here. Okay, so back then in my 20s, it worked fine. I was a young guy. But when I tried to get clean this time, it took on a much more serious. I was a much more mature person when I got clean. This time I was 40. When I first came to the doors, I was 42. I had recently been robbed in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. It's a very rough area. It's not a black ghetto. It's kind of a everybody ghetto. It's a drug den, and so I got robbed. I got hit in the head with a beer bottle, and somehow or other, I had managed to function among sometimes very dangerous people for all those years without any violence onto myself. So it was like something that woke me up. At the same time as that happened, uh, protease inhibitors came out. HIV drugs. I'm HIV positive. Have been for getting close to 30 years. But these drugs were now available. So prior to the time that I was robbed, there was nothing. There was no point in getting clean, really. My experience with HIV was people got sick, and then a couple of years later they died. Um, I had been through that with someone very close to me, and so as long as I was getting high, I didn't. That was not my mindset. I never thought about death. I could avoid it totally. But after I got clean, I got okay. So I went back to prison. I found out about these drugs, and so a glimmer of hope started to arise, because uh, people were going from being very, very sick to being relatively healthy in relatively short time. That was the thing about protease inhibitors. So there was a glimmer of hope that I could actually get clean and live clean. I wanted out of the meth life, because not only that, after you get robbed by someone, people see that as weakness. So then people who never even dreamed of challenging me in any way before now felt emboldened to try me. And I was never a tough guy, so it just got less and less attractive to me. Where I was mostly just trying to stay ahead of it, so that I wouldn't get myself hurt or go back to prison. I was out having a good time. So when I got clean, 14 and a half years ago, what I knew about recovery was you went to 12-step programs. They had people come in. I was in Vacaville prison at the time, in Vacaville, California. They would have meetings there, but going into the meetings, it's just like it just took me back to the other time where I was in and out of program, and I just wasn't getting anything out of it. The discussion of drugs was not making me well. It was kids keeping my mind locked into drugs. So I think the reason why I'm making this video is because I think a lot of times people think that they don't like recovery. They don't like it. They tried it. They don't like it. It's not worth it. But a lot of times, I think in my case was the program wasn't working for me. That doesn't mean that I had to keep using drugs. So when I was in prison the last time, I became suddenly very spiritual. I started going to church, and I started believing in God. he could save me. Now that turns people off also. Yeah, it's kind of it's kind of a big jump to go from the kind of street villain that I was. Uh, I couldn't even imagine. I remember thinking when I first when I first became a believer in Vacaville, I said, God, how am I going to go? How am I going to all of a sudden become this square who goes to church every Sunday and carries the Bible to church and all that? I had no idea how I could go from being one person to being another person. But I did have this glimmer of hope. So when I got out of the pen, my path was I went to a drug program here called Walden House in San Francisco. They're all over the place, I think, But so that they picked me up at the prison. And so what I got from the program was I had support. I had people around me all the time who understood we're going through the same thing. We never left the house by ourselves. You know, it was that kind of support. Not that they were teaching me a whole lot of things. We basically had a couple meetings a day, but I think mostly we were just there away from drugs long enough to break the habit. Because ordinarily, of course, when you get out of the pen, first thing you do is you go to your old friends. You go and find you want to see your people, and you want your dope. So this kept me away from that for a long time. So I went there. I relapsed twice from program, but what I discovered in my very last time there and time in prison because I messed up, relapsed in program, went back to prison, la da da da. Uh, but what I discovered was in Vacaville, I started going to this support group. Support group, it's this group of people. You come and talk about what's going on with you, whatever. Nothing about drugs in particular. Just about staying out of prison or planning to stay out of prison. But early on, I discovered that's something that worked for me tremendously. Support groups work for me, and I still participate in support groups to this very day. It's been 15 years. Now, very rarely is there any talk about drugs, but I went to therapy for like 5 years. We didn't talk about dope hardly at all. The only time I thought about drugs was when I went into these meetings. My 12-step friends are going to hate me for that, but and I do. I volunteered at a place on Friday nights. I have for 11 years. It's all 12-step people, and so that's my connection to like the recovery community. It didn't benefit me a lot by hearing about a lot of drugs. As I said, I found out about the drugs that ended up destroying me there. So, so my point is, don't give up on sobriety. Don't give up on being clean because you're not making it in 12-step meetings. I know 12-step, when you go there, they're going to make it sound like this is the only way. Anyone who doesn't do this is on a dry drunk and they're just waiting for accident waiting to happen. And that's not the truth. I don't blame them. That's what it is for most organizations. Any church you go to, even if there are 6 on a corner, if you go to each 6 of those, they're going to have a different idea of the truth. So that didn't have to be my truth. I've been clean now for almost 15 years, and I haven't been to a meeting in at least 13. So my point is, just like we figure out what doesn't work for us. It's not shameful to say, okay, I'm not getting anything out of this program. It makes me want to use just hearing about people using drugs. It's too close to me. So just like you figure out what doesn't work for you, we need to figure out what does. For me, it was program, drug counselors, and therapy, and mainly church. Just connecting to God. My problem was an absence of faith. I always felt like I had to make things happen for myself. I had to make myself feel good, and that nothing was being taken care of outside of myself. When I gave up that way of thinking, and basically because I've been forced into the realization that my ideas and my ways of living didn't work. They stunk. I was going to die a drug addict, die with a needle in my arm, which is horrible. And now with HIV drugs, it didn't have to be the case. I mean, I could get clean and live. So I said all that to say, even if 12 steps not working for you, don't give up on your sobriety. You may have different types of issues that can be handled with therapy, different things that can be handled with groups, different things where you don't need you just need to be clean. For a lot of you, programs I think are the best thing. I can only say that because that's what worked for me. I'm talking about what I know, kind of thing. But just to get you away from the life, get you away from dope for long enough where you can think clearly. But my thing, anyhow, just go to church. We don't talk about my church members are not crystal meth addicts. That's not, but that's what worked for me. It's just staying close to God, just staying close to the belief that there's something looking out for me and things are going to work out. And my life has never been better, and I haven't been to a meeting in 13 years. And so I just want to drop that on you, some food for thought. If anyone has any questions about comments about using and getting off dope, always feel free to make those comments here. That's something I would love to talk about. I don't get much response, so I guess people don't want to talk about it. But there are a few people out there who can benefit from some of the mistakes of others. All right, so I got that off. I got that all out. I'm sure it probably doesn't make any sense, but that's Happy Friday. I'm out.